Being a child in war, it's difficult, and I had no desire to really survive because I'd lost everything. My name is Ishmael Bea. I am an author, and I'm also a human rights activist. By age 13, I had been recruited into the army, and I was fighting as a soldier.
There are over 120,000 child soldiers in Africa. They are often separated from their friends and families and taken by rebels. They are given weapons and forced to do horrific acts to stay alive. The government must reform and maximize efforts to abolish the creation of child soldiers in order to prevent the destruction of lives and futures of children in countries of violence and civil war. The youth of the soldiers, the effects of fighting on the children, the recruitment of child soldiers, and the solution of government action will prove this issue deserves more attention and effort. Ishmael Bea is an immigrant from Sierra Leone who lives in New York City. When he is 12 years old, the civil war that seems so far away to Bea and his friends comes to their village. The village is attacked while the boys are not there. They try to go back to find their families but decide it is too dangerous. The boys are taken to Yele by military soldiers and are given an AK-47 to train to fight the rebels. Bea and several other boys are eventually taken to Freetown to live in a rehabilitation center. He is chosen by the United Nations, UNICEF, and other organizations to represent the voices of all child soldiers affected at a conference in New York City. After all this, he is sent to live with his uncle. When the war stretches closer and closer to his new home, he runs away from his uncle's house and spends all his money to get into Guinea to start a new life. The youth of soldiers in African countries such as Sierra Leone come from civil wars that tear villages and families apart. One such event came in 1999 when, quote, rebels from the Revolutionary United Front committed scores of atrocities against the civilian population of Sierra Leone, end quote. Children are forced to go out on their own to try to survive in a place where death surrounds them. Some of these children are taken up by militaries and rebels and are forced to fight. Ishmael Bea and a group of young boys are taken by military officers at gunpoint and are given a place to live and be safe in return to be trained to fight the rebels who are destroying their country. The corporal handed me the AK with two hands. I hesitated for a bit, but he pushed the gun against my chest. With trembling hands, I took the gun, afraid to look at it. I had never held a gun that long before, and it frightened me. Bea stated this at 12 years old. He is too young and innocent to be introduced into violence. Kids similar to Bea's age are barely strong enough to even hold a gun. Ishmael experiences death all around him on only his first day of combat. We took the guns and ammunition off the bodies of my friends and left them there in the forest. Young boys should not be exposed to gruesome death, as it can mentally affect and harm them. They are not mature enough to be able to cope with something like that.
From it, I lost everything. My immediate family was killed in the war, so my mother, father, and two brothers. You learned to function in madness very quickly. You have to adapt to your situation in order to survive. And often you're exposed to extreme levels of violence that you've never even heard of. There was a lot of hardship. We had lots of arms and ammunition, but no food, no medicine, and lots of drugs. But also when you've lost family and everything, you quickly learn to belong to this group. But to belong to this new group required violence. Violence became the way to show loyalty.
It is more difficult for a child soldier to be able to deal with combat and the violent acts they are forced to do than a grown, mature soldier because of youth. The author included this issue to show the world what it is actually like for a kid hoisted into battle and how they are affected physically and mentally. Child soldiers can be affected by the experience they have in combat for the rest of their lives. Some are affected to the point of mental illness. Children exposed to war-related stressors experience a spectrum of psychological morbidities, affected mentally with post-traumatic stress symptomology, mood disorders, externalizing and disruptive behaviors. Some children volunteer to join a militia or armed group. However, most children are, quote, abducted by armed groups, lured in by promises of education, security, money, and status, and indoctrinated or forced, end quote. The effects. Children are given false motives to throw their lives and futures away without them knowing. Militias sponsored by governments are the biggest problem. One such militia is the Tutsi armed groups in Burundi, quote, made up of youth aged from 12 to 25, have been formed with the encouragement of government authorities, end quote. There are many other government-supported armed groups across the globe that continue to recruit and use children. The solution to child soldiers across the globe involves the powerful governments and organizations of the world, such as the United Nations, to take action to cause change. They have the most power and greatest ability to be able to affect change worldwide, as it is much harder for regular organizations or anyone else to make an impact. The most effective way to protect children is by preventing and resolving conflict and sustaining peace. Making the minimum age 18 for recruitment would allow for young boys to grow up and mature before they are forced into war. International powers must find a way to solve conflicts in nations that have violence and use child soldiers. People believe that there are advantages for children as soldiers. The weapons given to the children are very simple, and it is cheap for armed groups to supply children with those weapons. Children are also, quote, easier to intimidate, and they do as they are told. They are also less likely than adults to run away, and they do not demand salaries, end quote. This makes it beneficial financially and or organizationally to use children. However, to use children is morally wrong because they are made to fight on the front lines and forced to be suicide bombers. The violent experiences they have often results in severe psychological and physical trauma. These effects can last a lifetime. The negative effects of combat on a child greatly outweigh the positive, calling a need for change to save lives and futures. Armed groups and militias in countries of violent conflicts worldwide use hundreds of thousands of child soldiers. Many organizations have been formed to try to impact change. Powerful international organizations and governments have the best ability to enforce and make change. The youth of the soldiers, the effects of fighting, the recruitment of child soldiers, and the need for the solution to be enforced prove this issue is of utmost importance.